I'll throw it open for anything you want to talk about or discuss.
So I do want to say something about a dream that I had, and you were involved in it. So I think it's probably
Okay.
germane. So, but I want to give someone else an opportunity to speak first, and Mary is here. So, yeah.
Okay. Well,
I'm good.
I have a question, but you can
There
go
you go.
first.
okay. Yeah, you're very little speak volume there. I'll try and turn it up at my end. Okay, go on, Karen.
Oh, sure. So I had a question about you've spoken about angels and over churches and that sort of thing. I wondered, is there like a bench of 3 angels over churches, or how does that work?
Yeah, there can be. I mean, there can be angels assigned, and what God does often works as a fractal pattern right throughout the kingdom, and therefore, God wants it to be a reflection of Him. So yeah, you can have angels assigned to churches, and there can be a bench of angels that are assigned to churches. There can be angels assigned for different purposes for churches in different senses. So yeah, none of that is outside of the realms of possibility. It's just learning to engage with them and actively. So when we had a bench of 3 here that was functioning, that when we first went and got invested into the mountain of that and the thrones, there were 3 angels assigned to us. Now, I didn't think of it as there's the angel bench. I just thought, well, here's 3 angels that are assigned to us as a bench, but in a sense, it's the same thing. They carry an assignment for that group, that bench that God had sent. So, yeah, I mean, I think it's that sort of thing should be anticipated, really. And why would God not want to be consistent in the way He does things throughout, really?
Okay, that makes sense. So is there anything special we need to do is there anything special we need to do to learn how to engage that or anything?
Well, I think once you establish a bench and you have a blueprint for what that's about, then it's just looking to be open to engage that from we're seated in heavenly places, so we need to take that place. That's going to be associated with an area of authority, so which is a mountain. And then from there, you then begin to seek wisdom for everything you need to enable you to fulfill those things. And that would be the cloud of witnesses. We had a council of 12 cloud of witnesses that were assigned to the ministry that we encourage people to begin to interact with, to see, why were they assigned? What were they going to help us with? And they all had some things sort of quite in common in terms of an area of their lives that then reflected, in how we do things. So it was quite helpful. And I think, you're going to just ask God as well, what do we need? Who do we need? How do we engage it? And, we went to the Court of Upright, not really intending to do that, but just felt led to go there. And there were 12 of these cloud of witnesses sat down, and they had torches and mantles that they were willing to, engage us with. So it, in a sense, was a little bit of a serendipitous thing in that we went there not really knowing that, but God had already, had it planned. So I think you'll find that as you pursue it, things open up and you begin to enter into, particularly into that sort of dimension of the angelic realm and all associated with that. The 7 spirits of God and everything is really there to help equip us. Wisdom is there to help equip us in ruling. So a bench of 3 is a governmental bench. So there's help there, and we can learn. Most people don't really know what they're doing when they start. That's just the reality. There's not too many manuals out there on how to run a bench of 3 or whatever. There's just not that much. And that which is out there, you take as a sort of fairly some principles here, but you don't sort of say this is a formula, because God doesn't like formulas, and He'd rather have us relationally engage and learn how to do things with Him and with anyone who's assigned on the journey, rather than thinking we have to have it all fully understood and set out. Most of these things are learned as you go. And if you've got an open heart and a desire for equipping, then God will begin to equip. I think the worst thing is when people think, oh, great, we're a bench and we can do all this now. And, there's maturity that needs to come, and there's transformation that needs to take place. And essentially being involved in that will be a spur to being transformed and getting things dealt with, because things will come up, and even three people who know each other really well, there will still be things of the dynamics of three people working together, submitted to one another, in that way, which will challenge dynamics of independence and anything like that, and openness and honesty, and all of that is part of the challenge of becoming like Father, Son, and Spirit, because that's ultimately what we're reflecting, and they're in perfect relationship with one another. No competition, no need for recognition or elevation or any of that stuff, which is very much sort of the usual Christian leadership model, is all about getting to the top of the tree, whereas a bench of three model is about being the foundation that people can stand on.
Yeah, that's super helpful. That there aren't three people at my church. I'm probably the only one that is into this at all. But it's just that I felt the head angel of the church asked me if I would want to come and sit in this group, and there turns out to be three angels there so I didn't know if that was I didn't know what that was.
Sure. Well, any blueprint that God has established will have an angelic presence, and there will be angels assigned. And we have a number of angels that are assigned to us that we've become familiar with over the years, and we're now sort of more familiar with what they do. But there is a sense where I do believe each church, each gathering of people will have angelic assignments by God, and because you're not operating in that physically, they're probably caretaking the positions until people can come into them, and if people don't come into them, then they are on assignment from God to facilitate certain things, to move things forward. But sometimes people don't respond to that well. Some people don't respond to change well, generally. I love change, but some people just they like the familiar. Well, it's working. This is what we know. And as soon as you start to challenge the status quo, it begins to create problems. And sometimes God will stir some of those problems to begin to challenge the status quo, and he'll use some of the angelic to do that. But he also is invested in seeing people fulfill their destinies and work it. So, I think he wants to help us more than we realize that the help's there quite often. But just engage with them and talk to them and find out what their function is and what they want you to do.
Okay. That's very helpful. I guess that was the case, but I wanted to ask you. Thank you.
Sure, no problem.
Okay.
All right.
Am I clear?
Yep.
All right, great. Well, this dream actually is two dreams. The first one occurred a few years ago, and I'm looking at two candlesticks. They're very tall, very large, but both have the flame of what I would call the exhaust or the fire of a jet engine. That's the fourth. Now, then the second dream, which is just recent, instead of the engine being, or the candlestick being upright, it was on its side, and it was revealed to be a jet engine, in fact. But you were there because it was like either under maintenance of some sort, as an engine could be, and you participated in its repair. But what you did was you took your whole hand and arm and extended it into one of the orifices of the engine, maybe an accessory orifice where air would come out to run some accessory parts of a jet engine. And you pulled out a fistful of gray grease. Now, that was that.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. Well, I could definitely see how that relates to stuff going on here. I don't know how it
Okay.
relates to you, but I could definitely see how it relates to me because I'm
All
doing
right.
quite a lot at the minute
All
um,
right.
in stuff that's going on. Um, but I don't know. I mean, yeah. I mean, if you're sort of for me, I can definitely relate to what is going on here
Okay.
in quite a big way in that dream. How that relates to you? What do you? How do you think it relates to you, or
Okay.
not?
Yeah. Sure.
Yeah,
Oh, how do I think?
yeah,
Well, be honest with you, the first one that I had involving the candlesticks, I just thought, oh, great. Why two? I can
mm,
understand one.
mm,
And the fact that they were so tall and yet one was a little taller than the other one, that sort of clicked or puzzled me a little bit. But the second one, or the second dream, where it appeared to be under repair. So I'm thinking, well, the first dream had two, and they were really active and flowing, and I felt pretty good about that. But the second dream implies that something may have either happened or maybe there's growth, or I don't know.
mm.
So I'm still concerned about that.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, all these type of things can have multiple different levels of
Okay.
meaning. So you could see this as a global scale
Yes.
of candlesticks, and you could see that that's an agreement between heaven and earth, and the heavenly one was bigger than the earthly one, but they were in agreement and they were beginning to function. And I mean, there's all sorts of things. Obviously, candlesticks, we're talking about remove the candlestick from the church in Revelation, which is
Yeah.
removing the light, which meant, hey, your mandate's over. And obviously, all those seven churches ended up exactly that, in that all
Right.
their candlesticks were removed
Right.
in the first century. Something on its side, you know, again, the symbol of that could be that something's broken, that it's not functioning, that it's not
Right.
connecting in the right way anymore, and actually then it's being fixed. So I would definitely identify with that because from what we had been doing, we jumped into things back in 2010
Uh,
and went for them without really knowing what we were doing and without an awful lot of wisdom or insight, but with enthusiasm
yes.
and from revelation, and we pursued things. And I think quite a lot of people do that. They find some revelation, they pursue it, and then they hit the wall. Okay, now this has got implications. Everything's going to be impacted by this. And some people say, oh, I'm not really prepared for that, and they back off. And other people
Right.
push through and try and break through and whatever. And I think we got to a point here where we had all the things in place as they could be in place, but they weren't functioning because
Yeah.
people weren't functioning in the positions. Even
Yeah.
though they were, in a sense, all in positions, none of them really had pursued, like I had,
Mhm.
how to do this. Although I taught it and all the information was there, but
Yes.
they didn't pursue it for their own lives. So, you know,
Yes.
people were in positions of government on mountains and thrones and doing all these things, but they weren't even doing it in their own life
Mhm.
effectively.
Right.
So that got challenged.
Sure.
It got challenged in that if you not do it in your own life and then you try and do it in a wider sphere, you end up where the enemy sort of says, well, hey, you think you can do this, you're not even doing it in your own life. And there
Yeah.
becomes well, I'm going to test it then. So, for instance, we had a health mountain, and every person that went on that health mountain ended up sick
Hmm. Wow.
because they weren't living in health in their own life. Therefore, they started to operate in authority to bring health to a church in which they didn't have the authority in their own life. So they got sicker.
Yes.
Yeah. So it was like, okay, what do we do with this? Well, we need to take them out of that position because they're in danger of trying to overextend the authority that they have because they're not exercising it in their own life. And
Yes.
I think by and large, I will say that will be true here for most of the people.
Hmm.
They had not done the work in their own life to be living in a lifestyle of heavenly realm activity in sonship and authority they weren't doing it, you know.
Yeah.
And it was their own issue. I mean, bottom line is that, you know, everyone's had the same opportunity to do what I'm doing. They just haven't pursued it as much as I have. Now, in some ways, I'm me. They're not me, but they've
Sure.
all have the opportunity of learning from the principles of how you engage heaven, how you establish your own life on the inside, and all of that. And so, you know, we then go down the line, you know, 7 or 8 years, and you know, God says, well, okay, if you know what you know now, and if you knew that 10 years ago, would you do things differently? And it was like, absolutely. So, what on the surface appeared like, let's say, a candlestick with like a jet engine, which was ready to take off and,
Yeah.
you know, go upwards, which
Mhm.
is the indication of standing tall. You know, there's a vertical thing there rather than a horizontal thing.
Right.
You know, we decided, well, God told me to withdraw from the situation and to stop doing what I was doing, um, with a view of empowering other people to do it, because I wasn't going to do it anymore. So
Mhm.
I took a step back and to say, okay, what do we know now and how would we do things differently? So we decided to reestablish the foundation of what we're doing by in a relational way rather than a structural way. So what we did, we thought we had strong relationships, so we established structure. But
Sure.
when we found out that the relationships weren't strong enough to handle operating in that structure,
Yeah.
so we decided to go back and establish the relationship so the structure could come out of the relationship rather than the other way around.
Mhm.
And in reality, that's where we are now. So I would see right now we would be on our side, and
Yeah.
you know, I'm definitely looking to pull out some of the grease and
Yeah.
gunk that's in the things that are stopping us going where God fully wants us to go.
Hmm.
Um, by I'm available to help, and I'm now doing some mentoring here and things like I do online, because now people want that and are willing to pursue it rather
Hmm.
than necessarily, um, hey, you got all the teaching,
All right.
go and put it into practice. Well, in reality, a lot of people haven't and probably don't know how to fully. So we're in that place where we need to equip people in a different way.
Yeah.
Um, but you know, it's okay. You know, I'd rather have a foundation that will be able to take whatever God wants to add to it
Yeah.
than think we've got a foundation and things in place that won't be able to take what God wants to do with it. So it's better to actually revisit that and reestablish it now
Yeah.
than wait and find you won't be able to cope with what's going to happen in the future. So for me, I mean, I see all these things as positive steps. You know, some people think, oh, well, you know, if you can't do it, who's going to be able to do it? Well, the reality, I'm just one person. You've got to then work with all the other people who are at different stages and different points of their journey that all have to work this out in their lives, and that may be very different for them. Um, you know, so what I'm not going to do is drive the agenda as
Hmm.
in an old model, which is exactly what would happen if I carried on pushing the agenda. People have just tried to please me and tried to please serving the vision. Well, I don't want people to serve a vision. I want people to serve God and have a
Hmm.
relationship with God in
Yeah.
which they are sons in that
Yeah.
relationship, not slaves. Therefore, you have to make sure that you're not going back to an old model, even though you don't want to.
Easy to.
So I think that's why God asked me to officially step out of the bench of three.
Right.
And then the other two people of the bench of three also responded. And then that dynamic created an opportunity for looking at things afresh in a more relational way, which would then take things forward.
Yeah.
And you know, and therefore at the same time, God challenged why we do what we do. So why do we meet? What do we do when we meet? Why do we do those things when we meet? Is that what should we do when we meet?
Hmm.
Why do we use this menu of 5 or 6 things when we meet and just change the menu items around rather than actually what does God want to do when we meet?
Hmm. Hmm.
So that all also came up in the same way.
Sure.
And when
Right.
that came up, that challenged, okay, why do we sing?
Mhm.
Yeah, why do we sing when we gather? Well, because everyone likes it. Yeah, but do we ask God whether he wants us to sing or not?
Mhm.
No, we just assume that he would want us to, because that's what we think is worship. Well, God doesn't think our singing is worship.
Oh.
We may praise him, we may adore him, but it's not worship, because worship is not singing. Worship is a state or an attitude of obedience to, hey, I'm acknowledging you're God and I am submitting myself to you as
Yeah.
God. That's what real worship is.
Yes.
And actually, our singing can be, we can be totally in rebellion and sing all the worship songs we like.
Right.
And God knows the truth.
He
So,
does.
so then, of course, I started to really, so I stopped teaching here because
Mhm.
I was being slowed down in having to do one session a week when I sometimes needed to do 2 or 3 sessions a week sometimes.
Uh,
So I stopped teaching live and just started to, do things in my office. So then I would
yeah.
come out of my office having finished doing a teaching session on a Sunday morning and then come and join the rest. And I was feeling completely out of place when I joined. And I was just
Mhm.
looking and thinking, there's got to be more than this,
Okay.
you know. So that also was part of the process
Yeah.
in then challenging, and I sort of expressed, hey, I'm really bored with this. We just keep doing the same thing. Yeah,
Mhm.
some people will come and think this is awesome, but
Yeah.
actually, I don't really feel God's that impressed by our, you know,
Mhm.
trying to do all this stuff and keep it all going like that.
Uh,
So again, that gave the opportunity of our musicians to feel, oh well, why are we doing this, and what does God want us to do? So they said, well, let's stop doing this for a while and let's see. And then all the people, of course, who love worship in singing, they're like, oh, well, you've stopped doing the things that we like.
mhm.
Well, yeah, because God said so.
Mhm.
Well, we like them, so we'll go somewhere that does do those things that we like.
Okay.
Okay, fine, that's great. Feel
Mhm.
free,
Go for it, right?
you know. So what
Sure.
we then discovered was we had an opportunity actually of being able to minister to people in a totally different way that was not based on the selfishness of consumerism of what people liked. So when I stopped teaching, some of the people who only came really because they really liked my teaching were like, well, you're not teaching anymore. Well, I am. You can just listen to it online. So
Mhm.
they didn't like it. So at the
Oh.
end of the day, you find out, why are people involved? Are
Wow.
they there because it's convenient or it meets their need or scratches their itch? Or are they actually invested in the purposes of God for this group of people?
Mhm.
So we discovered that a lot of people weren't, which is fine.
Yeah.
And then you can say, okay, well, who really feels that they do want to be involved in pursuing this? What is it going to look like? Who knows? You know, whatever God says.
Yeah.
So then what do? Well, we do whatever God says. And
Mhm.
if he says to sing, we'll sing. And if he says to do this, we'll do that. And if he says to do nothing, we'll do that. And if he says to have brunch together and fellowship, we'll do that. So now, whatever we do, we're asking him rather than making the assumption that we're going to keep the same system going because that's what God wants, that he initiated it. And actually, majority of times, he really didn't. And he's
Mhm.
not actually over impressed with what we do in reality because most of it is selfish and self-indulgent.
Uh-huh.
Is some genuine sense where we want to honor God and adore him and praise him, and we can do that through singing and various other things. But actually the indication what we saw is most people were there because it was what they wanted rather
Yeah.
than what they were giving. Because at the end of the day, a group of people that come together is about what we give, not what we receive. I want to
Mhm.
be me in that group and be a blessing,
Yes.
and
Yes.
not well, this is what I'm getting and I'm receiving this and I'm receiving that, and that's why I want to be part of this group. God so loved the world he gave,
Yay.
not God so loved the world that he demanded,
Mhm.
of us.
Mhm.
So I think it's been a very interesting journey, and I do relate to the fact that at the moment I could say that we look like that we're on our side and there's some maintenance going on.
Sure. Yeah.
I'm not the only one who's doing the maintenance, but I am involved. in that whole process.
Yeah.
And I think, we've got to be realistic. To transition from an old thing to a new thing is very, very difficult. No matter who's leading that agenda, it is very, very difficult.
Yeah.
Because the mindsets involved and the way in which we have these things just totally ingrained into us that we don't even really consider anything different, it's very difficult. I think it is possible, but it's very difficult. And I think it's much easier to start something from scratch.
Yeah.
I would have done that, and I think we would have done that here had we not had the legal constraints of that we actually run 4 organizations and manage a whole lot of other stuff other than a Sunday morning meeting, and they're all legally tied to the sort of ecclesia structure or legality of that structure. You can't just stop it and start again, unless God gives you a very clear strategy of how to do so. So he's still empowering us to be changed and to transition, but personally it will be so much easier to start with no expectations with a group of people to engage God and outwork what God's doing in a fresh way without all the previous history of everything else. And that was what I would encourage most people to do.
Sure.
Do something new.
Yeah. All right. Sure about that.
And it may well be, that dream is a state of, a lot of places that are going through the same process. It doesn't seem to be very effective at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's okay. We're not looking at a short-term fix here. We're looking at a long-term. How do we reach the next 2 generations?
Mm-hmm.
And that's not going to happen with a short-term thing. We've got to be enabled to be able to do that. And so, yeah, it's all good.
Part of our blueprint, Mike, we were to stay here a year and then go to Choco. And while we were here, we were to really press to learn the language and, immerse ourselves into the culture and that sort of thing. And we got involved in a church. And we've been teaching, and I even joined the praise team. I played the keyboard a little bit. And we got all wrapped up in that, the old system, the very old system, even though it's a young pastor, but it's the same very old system. And we were getting so, I don't know how to say it other than to say disturbed in our spirit. And tonight is my last night to teach. We've wrapped up the classes, and I'm so grateful because I'm like, I wasn't even enjoying myself. And it just shows us, this is not why we're here. Don't do that again, and stick to, focusing on the plan and the mandate that we have. And you're right. So easy to get caught right back up into that.
It is so easy. It is. And because that whole system is how most of the things still operate. And it's very difficult. And I know we want to try and change the system. We want to try and make it different. And we want to, be a testimony that changes. But in reality, it's very, very difficult. I mean, I was the one who started the church here and planted it and everything else. So in a sense, the vision really was mostly through me, and I'm the visionary type gifting here. So, if anyone could help transition something from old to new, it would be me. But it's still very difficult because if you're looking to the person, that reinforces the old mediatorial person is all about one person. So that's why I think, I had to step out of the way of it and be here to serve the others when they ask, not actually force the agenda. And I'm not, and I'm very happy not to. But any strong leader has a tendency to direct and make things happen.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, the old model. That's the Moses. Part the Red Sea, get water out of a rock, go up into heaven, tell people what God said, do all that, bring order to everything and bring some order and direction, and actually Joshua didn't operate that way. You know, Joshua did it everyone together. You know, with the presence of God represented by the ark, the priests put their feet into the water and everyone walked through in dry land.
Yeah.
You know, when they walked around Jericho, the presence of God in the ark with all the people walked around day after day after day until they all with one voice cried, and then the walls came down and were swallowed up into the earth. So it was a very different dynamic than the old one, and it's very difficult for leaders, senior leaders of old things, to adapt to not being the driving force, and for people to actually defer to them all the time, because it's just ingrained. Deference is built into the old system, and I don't want deference. So when I would start sharing things that I'd seen when we would have encounters in heaven, people went quiet because they thought what they were seeing wasn't as valid as what I was seeing, so I didn't share anything. So I had to say, well, okay, well, I'm not going to share then. And if I do, I'll share at the end after giving everyone else an opportunity of sharing, because people are looking for validation or disapproval. And if someone says something different to what they think, I'm going to disapprove. Not that I would, but it doesn't make any difference. The dynamic is part of the system. And if you don't deal with that dynamic within the system, you still get the same thing, just under new terms. So you'll get people setting up benches, and you'll get a senior leader on that bench, and the other two aren't really a bench. They're just there to do what the senior leader, they'll defer. And you'll get all these systems with names, setting up, you know, these things all over the place. But bottom line is they're still hierarchical, and they're still looking to either the central source or for the person, really, rather than actually, you know, look to God. And the foundation of anything that God is establishing will help you look to God rather than look to them. And that's not how it functions very often, because a lot of those people are charismatic people, gifted people. That's why they were doing the things in the first place. And people respect them and people honor them, but people also defer to them and thinking that they're the ones that go. And so we set up another mediatorial system.
Right.
You know, the whole Engaging God program is about helping people engage God. Not become slaves to a program or to another system. Otherwise you get the same thing all over again. You know, and it's so easy for things to drift back or never really change in the first place, other than changing names. But the actual mechanics of something or the way of things or the dynamics of it don't change. And I think that's what God's doing here. He's enabling the dynamics to change, because I am not going to facilitate it staying the old way. But it takes, you know, it's not easy to do that, because even now people still are looking for me to do certain things. And I'm like, well, you can do it. You know, you don't have to ask me my opinion. You got a better opinion to ask. It's God's. You know, ask him. You know, see what he's saying. But I know a lot of places are trying to do something new, but they're still really doing it in an old way, and nothing really much has changed other than some terminology and some heavens open. But things practically are not really any different. And to be honest, you could go around to, I don't know, 99.999% of all the meetings around the world, and they'd all pretty much have the same basic things attached to them. Very few of them would be radically different, because they're just keeping the same thing going. Yeah, we'll have some time of worship, we'll have some time of teaching, preaching, we'll have some sort of notices. You know, it's usually always the notices, you know, and you know, and you might have a bit of ministry, or you might have a bit of activation, depending on what stream you're in. You know, and it might be led by one person, or it might be meant by a group of people, but essentially it's still being led rather than facilitated. And I think facilitation is very different from leading. So, you know, we're still got a long way to go, really. Hey, but someone's got to take the first steps, and we're still moving forward. So it'll be interesting to see, you know, what happens in the future. But yeah, don't get caught up in it again. Keep going.
I'm free.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, when the new covenant began, the old covenant didn't want to stop and let it go. It took another 40 years of
Okay.
having, until the old covenant was actually ended fully. It was becoming obsolete, fading away, but people still tried to get believers to follow the law and
Hmm.
to not eat meat to idols and not do this and not do. And the Judaizers would go into all those new churches and try and bring them back under the law, and
Yeah.
even Peter got sucked into it.
Right.
Okay.
And Paul had to say, "Hey, you're out of order, mate. You know,
Hmm.
you're quite happy to eat with the Gentiles, and now these people come from Jerusalem, and you're hiding, and you're now pretending. Why? Because of fear of man. You know,
Yeah. Good man.
it happened then, and it continues to happen. We've got to do as whatever we can to ensure that it doesn't continue to happen. If we're going to do something new, let's make sure it is new, and not
Sure.
just a new name with the same basic process and thing going on. Yeah.
Yeah. Here we find that angels are showing up, and that experience is being resisted. There is a move to resist that, and several people have encountered the angelic in church or in other settings, but still, uh, we try to encourage them and say, yes, this is it, yes, but yet we see there is a current, a
Mm.
strong current to this discouragement.
Mm. Yeah.
And in fact, we were participating in a service in a Uramall, which is about 200 miles from where we're located now. And God manifested in a very profound way. In fact, I was able to tape the audio of it and get a few pictures. Uh, and the pastor was literally slain in the spirit twice. And his body was like dead weight. He tried to move around. But the word came that God is doing a new thing there for the purposes of Uramall and the whole city and the rest of the world. But there
Mm.
are things that we had to submit to as the body that is just moving freely amongst the people.
Mm.
But as we copied it, or recorded it, we represented it to the pastor, who was not really aware. Maybe he was, of what was going on, or at least how we reacted to it. But yet there was a resistance,
Yeah.
still a resistance to that.
Yeah. Well, you cannot operate with a system of control and empowerment at the same time. And if you're going to operate in a reflection of heaven on earth, you have to have it as empowerment, not control. And that's where people's livelihoods and their jobs and all the stuff and their reputation and everything tied up with their identity is tied up with an old system. They find it very difficult to let it go.
Yeah.
And they're taught that. A lot of them are taught that in seminary and different places to have this separation between them and the people, or to have, that's why they wear a dog collar and different things, to actually say that they're different.
Okay.
Yeah, and they're taught that. I mean, that's what they're taught in seminary, that you must be separate from the people. You can't, you've got to be the position that they know who you are in authority. And
Okay.
actually, it's very difficult for people to let it go, and so there is resistance.
Yeah.
And you can understand it, but it's frustrating, obviously, when you see something potentially new and it gets thwarted, because there is that resistance from those who are threatened by something new. For me, everyone hearing God is an awesome opportunity. For some, it will be a horror story, it'd be a nightmare.
Yeah.
All their church are hearing from God. Well, I'm paid to hear from God, would be their response. They won't need me if they can all hear from God for themselves. What am I supposed to do? How is the system going to work if it all doesn't go through the Pope, who's the only one who hears from God? Because that whole system is based on one person hearing from God.
One person.
And as soon as everyone else hears from God, well, the whole thing falls apart. Or they don't realize, well, they don't need it anymore. Why would we need a Pope when we can all hear from God? So the system gets challenged, and individuals within the system gets challenged, whether it be Catholic or Protestant. At the end of the day, it's all basically still based in the same mediatorial system But when it gets challenged, it gets resisted because of the dynamic of history, tradition, and the individual people who aren't willing to let go of their position before the people.
Yes.
Not easy, but you know. So
It's,
go and start something new.
that's what it is. Something brand new.
We do have a
something brand new.
Choco, June the 7th. This will be our first trip, and we'll be making continuous trips over from that point, and eventually, and probably not too long, maybe by February when this lease is over, we'll actually be moving there.
And that's fertile ground. It's barren. I think, what is it, about 200,000 people in the crypto area. Very few churches. Very few churches.
Great.
Yeah. So
sounds like an ideal place to go.
Thank you.
Don't go and start another church.
No.
Awesome. Great. Okay. Anyone else got any questions or things they want to talk about?
You see my great man?
Well, I'll just say that I'm taking great encouragement from this conversation, actually, from the journey that I'm on, because I'm looking at this whole journey of the relationship to responsibility. Well, surely I've been out in this for a number of years. Surely I need to have some responsibility that I'm and count for something. But where I'm at the moment, what God is doing is just a total untethering, unbundling of every fiber of my belief system and my what's basically in my mind, in my subconscious mind, and all of those things. So I've had this wonderful spiritual encounters where my spirit, I can see things, and I see more of what the end state should look like, where I should go towards. But that disjointness and the congruency isn't there between spirit, soul, and body. So, and if I look at what I'm hearing here and what I see at my workplace, where a lot of the reaction from people are coming out of their trained behavior of the nurture, the nature, and the trauma.
Yeah.
And so that process of just unbundling and untethering from all of this is what God's taking me through now. And I said, well, if I listen to what you're saying, it's a good thing, because the organicness and the fluidity of God.
It's frozen there a little bit. Hopefully I'll get back in a second. But yeah, he's absolutely right in that it takes time, and take as much time as you can before you end up operating in responsibility to ensure the relationship that you have and the heart of God that you have within it all is what then dictates how we can outwork that in reality. You know, it's so we like to rush. You know, you stuck there for a while. You know, but oh, now I can't hear you now. Oh, unmute yourself. There you go.
Oh, sorry, internet just dropped out for a moment.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So I don't know where I left off, but yes, I think just reiterating the fact of doing a thorough job of untethering.
And it's so much easier if you're not in areas of responsibility where what you've got to do affects other people, and you've got to, the more you know the heart of God, the easier it is to operate in responsibility, because you're outworking his heart rather than maybe our own understanding, our own ideas. And it takes quite a lot of untethering from those things to come into that place. And although, yeah, we can learn to do that in our own lives, you know, some of the first responsibility we have is for us, isn't it? You know, it's like no one's gonna ask me about my wife's mandate, you know, or her destiny. God's going to talk to her about that. He's going to talk to me about mine, and he's going to talk to each of us, and we're not responsible for someone else's. We may have relationship with them and be part of their journey, but we're not responsible for anyone else's. So, even when we're going through the process of transformation and change, what we're really learning to do is take responsibility for our own lives in that process. And what you learn from that process actually then stands you in really good stead when you then start to operate in levels of authority towards other people or other situations or corporate things or national things. You're just in a better place to be able to function there in the same way that you do for your own life. I mean, Jesus sort of said, we'll start with Jerusalem and then go further afield until eventually you get to the ends of the earth. And people want to go to the ends of the earth before they've ever done things. And that's what I was sharing earlier, when we had people who are on spiritual mountains of authority that they'd never really outworked in their own lives, but they expected to do that in a corporate setting, and it just doesn't work. You have to establish it in you. You've got to have a testimony in you and each of us if we're then going to actually see that testimony benefit others. Otherwise, it's just theory. A testimony is an actual proven experience of what you've gone through, going through, whatever else. Yeah, and I do think it is like that. Our Jerusalem does have a lot more junk in it than we actually ever thought. It's just the way it is, and God is not unhappy about the fact that we're taking our time working through the process of dealing with that. It's like Jesus spent 18 years of apprenticeship in a workshop, effectively, for 3.5 years of ministry. At 12, he knew he needed to be about his father's business. At 12, in the temple, and he taught them even then more than they would have got taught from rabbis and everyone else. He had the capability, but what did he do? He went into a process of whatever that process did for him, prepared him for when he eventually would come onto that world stage and do all the things he did in demonstrating the kingdom and the heart of God and the love of God and everything else. And so if he did that, then I think there's some realization that we also have to go through that as well. And same with someone like Joseph. You had an amazing dream, whatever, had some issues probably that needed to get knocked out of him, and went into the pit and into the slavery and into the servant and then into the dungeon, but then in a day he's out on the world stage and saves the whole of them from famine, and then saves all his family, and then fulfilled the vision in a way which, came because he'd gone through a process of transformation and had obviously dealt with the issues of forgiveness and everything else, and along the way. So yeah, it is a challenge. Yeah,
I just think sometimes it goes too slow. That's the thing here.
Well, yeah. I mean, the pace of things. We shouldn't be dictating the pace of things. That's the key. Let's respond relationally to the process, not try and force the process because we want to get it quicker, and the shortcuts that are offered. Let's take the journey takes the journey, and the journey is what brings the preparation. And if you shortcut on the journey, you miss out stages of preparation. It takes as long as it takes. Now, do I think we can walk faster on the journey sometimes? Yeah. We can have a better pace of walking, and sometimes we can drag our feet and stop for a while, and that's part of some of the things that we have to make decisions over and choices. But bottom line is we sort of keep walking it out, and I think, take as long as it takes. That's the key, because no one's going to be questioning you about how long it takes. That's not how God's doing it. God didn't say to Jesus, well, you wasted 18 years. You could have done this 18 years ago. Now was the time. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, to do this. The same with Joseph. It's like, God wasn't saying, hey, you wasted your time in the prison, because it wasn't a waste of time. And obviously no one, unless you talk to Joseph, you don't know what he went through, and you don't know how he was learning. And those are some of the things it's really good to talk to the cloud of witnesses about. The things that they went through that are not written in the Bible, you have, a few chapters of a story that took years and years and years. And unless you talk to them, I mean, I had some conversations with Esther recently about her process of transformation and purification and refining, call for the kingdom at a time such as this, and all these great scriptures. She was like, told me she wasn't happy about that whole process. She didn't want to be the king's concubine, and she was resistant, not realizing that this was a preparation for her destiny. And she said to me, most people don't realize what their destiny is until they're in the midst of it. So they often see the process as something to be resisted, not embraced. So the fact that we're embracing the process is a really good, positive thing, and I think will be very helpful and go down the line in that way, to realize that some of these things, just because it's hard doesn't mean it's wrong, and just because there's opposition doesn't mean it's wrong. It's just, hey, this is a journey which we have to learn to overcome, to subdue, to rule, and to be transformed, to be fruitful in, but it will get there in the end. So, yeah, Mary, you got your hand there.
Well, you really made a good point. How many of us would be willing to go through 18 years of preparation to have 3 years of ministry and it's done? I don't know how willing I would be to go through that, because in the back of my mind, it's like, I don't want to miss it. I don't want to miss it. I don't want to miss it. Why is this taking so long? Can't we get this over with? But as I said, I'm finding out my Jerusalem has a whole lot more junk in it than what I ever imagined. And I'm sure there's a whole lot more that needs to be unearthed. And at times it gets me frustrated to say, like, can't we just, do one big clean sweep, get it all out and move on? But evidently that's not the way that the Lord wants to do things. But I had an interesting thing. I usually go to Starbucks on Tuesday morning, and there's one corner of Starbucks, and we have what we call the corner, and there's usually the same 4 people that ultimately wind up there. But real early in the morning, the one high school girls basketball coach comes in. He goes to the gym real early in the morning, works out, comes to Starbucks, has a cup of coffee, then gets ready to go to school. And normally, other than saying hi to him, we really don't talk. Well, he happened to be sitting in the corner this morning, and he never sits in the corner. And I came in, and I just said, "Hey, Bert, how you doing?" And for the first time, he just said, he goes, "I am just so tired." And he said, because he is a coach, he doesn't get Thanksgiving break, he doesn't get Christmas break, he really doesn't get a break until July, because even though school is out, there are games going on, there are things that he has to do for the team. And he said, "I am just so tired." And he said, to a degree, really frustrated. And he's a believer. And he said, he goes, "I spend about $3,000 to $4,000 out of my own money each year to help some of the kids on the team." He said, so he goes, we go to church, he and his wife go to church. He said, we tithe. He said, and I look at this as an offering, that I'm pouring into someone else's life to try to help them. He said, but, I'm just so tired. And he said, I have a relationship with the Lord, and I asked him to just speak.
I'm going to have another drop out there, right at the very moment. So it's just a bit of a shame. Hopefully she'll come back in a second and she can finish off what she's going to say. But yeah, this process is not easy for anybody, really.
Talking about that, he believed that he heard the Lord say that God was going to do something amazing in his life. And so, of course, he thought instantaneously, wow, the heavens are going to open. And he goes, and now I'm beginning to wonder, did I really hear that? Now I'm beginning to doubt. He said, because I haven't seen it happen right away. And so I was just encouraging him to say, Bert, first, what you're going through, I understand exactly what you're going through in terms of being tired, in terms of, to a certain degree saying, I feel like I'm beating my head against a wall. Nothing seems to change. And then have the Lord say something and you're like, okay, wham, here it is. And then you're waiting and you're waiting and you're waiting. And so I was just able to encourage him to say, why don't you go back and ask the Lord, who do you want to be for me right now? I said, because we all know, he's our healer, he's our provider, he's whatever. Said, but why don't you ask him, who are you trying to be for me right now? So that I can engage with that. And he had to get up and go to school, and he goes, I've probably not, because this is probably the longest conversation I've ever had with you, because he usually talks to Joe and other people. And he said, I so needed to hear this morning. He said, you don't have any idea how much this has helped. Now, when I walked into Starbucks, I had no grand plan to go in there and turn the world upside down. I had even forgot to pray about releasing the heavenly atmosphere into the building before I got there. And yet there was one of those times that it just happens. And, I said to him, just be on the lookout. Don't necessarily think that the amazing thing is going to be large. It might be, I said, but always be looking, because there may be a lot of small, amazing things that cumulatively work into something big. So sometimes do I get really frustrated because it seems like this process is taking forever, and you seem to have gotten through it a whole lot faster than I did, and that's just my understanding, which is probably not true. Yeah, it does, and yet on the other hand, even sometimes as I get frustrated and say, I don't know that I can do this anymore, I'm just saying no. God is doing something, and I probably just don't see the whole extent of it. Maybe he's building persistence and continuity into me, and that's just not going to drop out of heaven. That comes from doing it, and building up to it. And I'd rather have it drop out of heaven, but that doesn't seem to be the plan.
No. And I think because everything in the kingdom works by relationship, and you don't get instant relationship. And the things that build relationship, establish relationship, outwork relationship have to be relational. And if it was a weekend makeover or an instant drop out of the sky, that's not relational. And that's why everything's processed with God, because process is relationship.
Yeah.
Instant fixes are not relational.
Yeah.
And therefore everything with God operates. Now, some things operate, and let's say you have a miracle, that something instantly changes, but there's usually something before that's gone in preparation for it. And there's usually something after in the outworking of it. And I think it's always that, I think the key is we're not waiting in inactivity. We wait with expectation and expectancy, and we do look at the little things that are going on around, not when's it going to happen, and then I'm disappointed because it hadn't happened. Well, it's happening. The thing is, it is happening. That's the way to look at it. It's not going to happen. It is happening. But we don't recognize it's happening because we're looking for the instant happening rather than the process journey of happening, that by the time it does happen, I'm ready for it. And if it happened prematurely, I would be premature and not ready for it.
Yeah.
And that's the same with every pregnancy. You do not want a baby coming out at 3, 4, 5, 6 months.
Yeah.
Yes, the baby can come out earlier than 9 months, but usually there are problems associated with coming out earlier.
Yeah.
And actually in anything, when God does something, the incubation period for the development of everything to be ready at the right time is so important in this. And I think the sort of prophetic type thing of it's the expectation of, well, when? Now? Now. Why is it not happening now? Or why am I waiting? Well, and that I think just creates a wrong view of how God does everything. You look at the Bible and the stories of people's journey. Well, it took 100 years for Noah, and that was based on a whole load more years before that, which was building relationship and learning from others. And the same with everyone else. It took 80 years for Moses. So, the story, in there is for all of them, none of it happened very quickly for most of them.
Yeah.
Abraham, it took quite a few years for him to get the promise as well.
Yeah.
Walking out, these were things that are illustrative of the journey that everyone goes through rather than the instant event that you can get. And I think we've sort of promoted the instant event type things. Go to a conference and everything will be sorted. Get someone to lay hands on you and then it'll be fixed. Have this and then this will happen. And all of that's a sort of a non-relational, quick fix process, which is our culture of the day, really.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's the culture of the day. You can walk into Starbucks and they'll give you a coffee. Well, 200 years ago, you wouldn't have got a coffee like that. You'd have had to brew it, and you would have had to bought the beans, and you would have had to got the fire, and you would have had to. And at the end of the day, you wouldn't have had electricity to do it either. So bottom line is, you'd have had to make the fire. You'd have to, and you'd have to go through the whole process. The same with cooking. You don't have ready meals and a microwave 100 years ago. So majority of it was cooked from scratch.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then you didn't even have a supermarket, so most of it was actually grown.
Yeah.
Or bought from the person who grew it, from the farmer or whatever. Everything was processed, and therefore you had a relationship with the person that you bought the stuff from, because you went back to them every week. And now you don't have the relationship with the people in the supermarket. You don't even know who they are mostly. It's very rare that you ever go back to the same till twice with the same person. Occasionally you can, and we've got a little bit of a rapport with some of the people that we have sort of over the years got used to doing with us. But bottom line is, it's not real relationship.
Right.
And I think God wants to bring things back to what real relationship is, because that's a reflection of Him.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. Two people I know on Facebook. One is the daughter. It's a mother and daughter. The mother's up in Knoxville. I see her occasionally. The daughter lives over here in Canton. I've known her from when we used to do the worship nights at Dave and Anita's every Saturday night. She pretty much was the worship leader. Well, the mother, who she and her husband have a church up there, post on Facebook, here's the introduction to Robert Henderson's courts, using the courts, and saying, this is what I spoke about the other week. And I said, oh, okay. So then her daughter yesterday posted up like, hey, everybody, this is what we've been looking for. Every Christian needs to look at this. So we're going to be having dinner with them Saturday night. And I said to Joe, I said, I'm not necessarily going to bring it up unless she does. One thing.
Bring it up.
Huh? Well, no, because here's what happened. Several years ago when Ian Clayton was here, and we didn't happen to go to the meeting, but I don't know if you remember Christy Imbriali from back. Okay, well, Christy went to the meeting, and Christy and this other woman were all part of a mentoring group working with some of the college kids. And so Christy goes to the meeting, and of course she's talking about, what she experienced, and some of the college kids heard secondhand, allegedly, what happened in the meeting. Now, my friend Deborah, this is the daughter, was not there at all, really took it upon herself to really come down and say how wrong everything was with the meeting. And so Christy is saying, but you weren't there, and some of the things that you heard happened, you weren't there. That's not what it was. Well, Deborah pretty much drove Christy out of Dave and Anita's and saying, you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong. Everything you're listening to is wrong, wrong, wrong. So she can have that sort of a very strong personality. Right. So I said to Joe, I said, I wouldn't be surprised if it comes up at dinner, but I don't know, because this is just a casual time that we're all sitting down. Everybody's going to be sitting around talking. And I said, there's part of me that wants to be a little snotty and say, like, I've known about this for years, I got the CDs years ago. I've known about this, which I'm not going to do. But if she, I said to Joe, if she ever came and asked me, well, why didn't you say something? I said I would have to say, because I saw what happened with Christy. And I didn't feel like, getting machine gunned down, because I'm bringing something that is totally different. I saw how that got handled, and I didn't want to get in the line of fire. And I've slowly said a few things and found that it wasn't received. I said, so that's why I just don't say anything, because it's like, that's not it. But I realized the one thing I would say to her is, don't try to make this into a system.
No, system of crap.
Here's the formula. This is what it's not a formula. It's a way to develop relationship. And don't think that this is where you start getting revenge on other people and getting judgment against other people. That's not what it's about either. It's all about you and the Lord and things in your life that need to be dealt with, that he's working through with you. It is not about, because there's another group, and I know that they're using it that way. And when my friend Anita went into the group, one person said, Nancy Pelosi is coming down. And Anita's like, huh? What? But that's the way that it is. Like, oh yeah, we're taking real action. So it's just going to be interesting to see if the subject matter comes up, how it is. But in fact, if she posted again on Facebook, that's the thing I'm going to say. Look, don't try to make this as a system. That's not what it is.
Absolutely. And it's not a new form of prayer. And if you're not able to go into the courts of heaven, it don't work. So going into heaven is absolutely fundamental to engaging this court process. It isn't just a form of prayer that you can then do prayer this way now, and it won't work. And I was also connected or knew of the group that were using the courts of heaven to bring judgment down on people and situations and cities. And I don't know what court they were in, but they weren't in the heavenly one, because that's not how it works. It's about blessing, it's empowering. Yes, it's dealing with things in our own lives, but it's also being able to bless others. And if there are issues between people, it is being able to forgive them and release them and bless them, rather than, hey, I'm going to get my pound of flesh and I'm going to get revenge. And it's so easy. Again, if you don't know the heart of God, if you've not had a face-to-face intimate thing with the heart of God, it will become a system. And particularly in the hands of someone, as you say, who may well carry a forceful thing with other people, and it could very easily be misused in that way. And of course, it don't work, but it's not pleasant in that way. But the enemy will try and use it, because people, do have authority in a sense, and the enemy will use that authority that people give him to bring bad things against people, which is not in any way what any of that's about, but it can be used inappropriately by people who don't have the experiences of engaging actually face to face with God in those realms.
Yeah.
And that's, the key. I facilitated in some areas court cases, and it was very clear to me that most people didn't understand them. Yeah. And they were just doing a rehash of their intercession and intercessory things without it ever being operating in the court of heaven.
Yeah. And I mean, I find I rarely go into the courts at all. No. I'm having a hard time remembering even the last time it was there. It's normally if something comes up, I just talk to the Lord about it and say, let's just deal with this here and now, without going through the whole process. I guess I'd say I wouldn't go unless I really felt so directed for him to say, you need to do this. For the most part, he and I just deal with things, one-on-one.
Yeah, absolutely. And to be honest, it's like it becomes everything needs a court case. Just like years ago, it's everything needed deliverance, and the demon was behind every problem. And now it's like there's the court case that'll solve every problem. It won't. And yes, using the courts of heaven and that accusation, that's only one of the many different courts. It's only a small fraction of what the courts of heaven are about. Just that one aspect of dealing with accusations, is a fraction of what goes on in the courts and the councils and assemblies of heaven. And I don't think that Robert Henderson, although I think it's a good stepping stone, I don't think it reflects that. And, when I was in the US a while ago, I saw an advertisement for a Robert Henderson meeting, and it was titled, a new form of prayer, and I thought, no, it's not a new form of prayer. If you're going to use it like that, actually it won't really be effective. And it will become a formula, and you'll try and do it as a formula. Well, I'm going to pester the judge until I get a verdict, because the Bible says that, but it doesn't mean that that's how we should treat it, treat the judge. But you can easily take anything out of context and turn it into a new way of doing things, which is wrong, in reality. You know?
Right. Yeah.
There we go. Anyway.
So anyway, so that's going to be interesting to see at Saturday night if
Yeah.
that even comes up in conversation, because of the whole mix of people that are there, it might not. I don't know. If she posts again on Facebook, I may just put a little tagline in there and say, this is not a system or a formula. There's a whole lot more, and there's just not one court. There's multiple courts, and it's all, you really have to have that good that real strong relationship with the Lord to start operating in the court. So I'll see. I'll let you know if any bombs go off.
All right. Okay, I need to leave it there. I'll catch